We are up to, if anyone noticed, my
No.
favorite chapter in Tanya, chapter 32. Chapter 32 is a very special chapter because 32 in Hebrew, the letters for 32 are the letters Lamed Bet. What does Lamed Bet spell? I saw Harriet did it. Yes, Lamed Bet is Lev, it's heart. So we are quite literally at what's known as the heart of the Tanya. It's also interesting that in the original manuscripts, this chapter didn't exist. It was kind of inserted later, before the first publishing. The author had all the transcripts and he inserted this chapter, kind of dropped it in at this particular spot, which I'm sure was very purposeful to make sure that it was chapter 32. And what do you think the topic of chapter heart is? Of course, the mitzvah of the heart, which is to love your fellow as yourself. So it in a way, it kind of seems to be like parenthetical to the flow of the Tanya, like we were following a flow before, and the flow is going to continue in chapter 33, and this kind of seems to deviate because it's like a dropped-in chapter, although it does very naturally connect, but it takes us on a little like deviation, and then we come back to what we were talking about before. So let's talk about this mitzvah of loving our fellow as ourself. Let's first talk about how we're connecting it to the previous chapter. In the previous chapter, for those who remember, we're talking about joy, and we're talking about how to achieve joy when I'm frustrated with myself. Like I've done things that are not what I would have wanted to do. I'm frustrated at where I am. And when I look myself in the mirror and I say, ugh, like I'm so distant from where I'm supposed to be. How am I supposed to stay happy in this kind of situation? How can I remain upbeat and not let it just drag me down when I feel so awful about where I am in life? And the message in last chapter was that you have to stop seeing yourself as a physical being that's having spiritual experiences. We have to start identifying as spiritual beings that have a physical experience, meaning our truest essence is our godly soul. I am a spark of divinity. I am godly. I happen to be in a body. Hi, Chana. I happen to be in a body and I have these physical limitations, but my truest essence is I'm divinity. And when I start identifying with my soul, so then even though I make mistakes and I'm not where I think I'm supposed to be, that's only my body. That's not my true essence. If anything, I start to feel bad for my body. And I start to say, oh, I feel so bad that I am not, that I made all those mistakes, that I'm not where I'm supposed to be. But when I pity my body, I'm not pitying myself. It doesn't lead to that same kind of depression. It's like I feel bad and I want to help uplift my body because that's not the real me. The real me is the godly me, the spiritual me, the one that just wants to be connected and wants to be in the right place. That's what the discussion was last chapter. And in this chapter, the author tells us basically, if you continue to use this logic and you continue to identify as a spiritual being having a physical experience, meaning your spiritual, hi Lorraine, your spiritual part is the main part, and guess what? You are also on a sure track to achieve true love of your fellow. Because true love of your fellow is impossible otherwise. So before we start talking about this mitzvah of truly loving our fellow, I heard a great story today that I thought would be a good opener. The story is told about a man named Rabbi Mordechai Dubin. Rabbi Mordechai Dubin lived in the first half of the 20th century. He lived in Russia. He was a chassid who was very heavily involved in education. And like many good Jews who were involved in Jewish education, he was exiled to Siberia as a punishment. Now, what happened with Rabbi Mordechai was, which was common apparently in those days, one day while he was in Siberia, randomly an officer shows up and tells him, Mordechai, you're free. Go. He's like, okay. but he's in Siberia. His family is thousands of miles away. You know, there's no phone, there's no communication. He doesn't have money. He has basically just the clothes on his back, which were prisoner clothes. Where's he supposed to go? And it was actually a very mean trick because here they are in the middle of Siberia. There's no civilization around, and they tell you, go, you're free, run. You have nowhere to go. And a lot of people would just, they go and then they'd eventually just die of cold or starvation or, something else. But Rabbi Mordechai realized he had no choice, so he started going. And he started going as fast as he could until he could reach the closest town. And he's walking and walking. It's freezing cold. He has these, thin prisoner clothes on his back. And he finally shows up to a town, like towards the end of the day. It was getting dark. And he looks around. He's looking for a house with a mezuzah that he'll recognize as a Jewish home. Maybe somebody will take him in and be kind to him. And he finds one. He spots a Jewish home. And he starts knocking on the door. And the people, they peeking out through the shades. And they see this unfamiliar man in prisoner uniform. They were afraid. I mean, they knew where they were living. This is communism. This is a very, scary era. They didn't know what kind of trick was being played on them. Like, who they sending to come into our house? So they didn't open the door. They were afraid to open the door. And he's knocking and knocking, and he's crying, and he's saying, I believe he said his name. He said, Mordechai, Ben, whatever, but the family was afraid to open the door. He told the story later. He said at this point, he was basically resigned that he's going to die here on this doorstep because at this point, he was so hungry. He hadn't eaten in hours. He had no warm clothes, and he's outside. He's just going to die on their doorstep. He said as he was lying there, like taking his, slow breaths, he said he suddenly started thinking, can you imagine what's going to happen tomorrow morning when the family that lives in this house will open the door and find his body there and realize that, they'll ask some questions and they'll realize that actually it was a Jewish guy who showed up here and he was really a prisoner seeking refuge and we didn't bring him in. They're going to be so broken. They're not going to be able to live with themselves. And the thought of the pain he's going to cause to this family, he said that gave him the stamina to get up just one more time and bang on the door and the window without giving up until eventually they opened the door and they let him in. Years later, he reflected on the story and he says, I realize that the mitzvah of Ahavat Israel, love of my fellow, actually saved my life. I found the story fascinating because, we talk about, real altruism, really loving your fellow. Can you imagine being on a level that when a person is in a life and death situation, the thought of their fellow is more important to them than the thought of themselves? For himself, he was done. He had already given up. There was nowhere to go. But the thought of the pain he's going to cause to someone else, that gave him stamina to keep going. I thought that was mind-blowing. And how do we work on achieving this level? How do we really get to a place where we can love others more than we love ourselves, or at least as much as we love ourselves? So before we read it inside, let's take a minute to examine why is this mitzvah technically so hard? The Torah tells us, "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," love your fellow as yourself. It doesn't say treat your fellow as yourself. It says love your fellow as yourself. And all the commentaries have issues with this. How do you command someone to love? And not only how do you command to love, because getting someone, I could command you to eat the pizza. I can't command you to love the pizza, right? I can't make you love doing it. And we had this question, we spoke about love of God, which the Tanya speaks about at length elsewhere. But when we're talking about another person, how does the Torah command us to love? And let's think of the people who we know. How many less than pleasant people are there in the world in our daily interactions? Really? I'm supposed to love every single one of them? And to what extent am I supposed to love them? As much as I love myself. Biologically, that's not possible. Everyone knows, on a basic scientific level, every human cares most about themselves. I know it's a hard discussion to have with teens today, because unfortunately their first go-to is like, what do you mean? I don't like myself. I don't like myself, But when we say love yourself, you could translate that as care for yourself. You know, when you are really, really hungry and there is one plate of food in front of you and you're about to eat it and someone else grabs the plate of food, do you feel happy or do you feel annoyed? Like, who were you hoping would get that plate of food? Of course, you, because we're naturally wired to look out for ourselves over anyone else. So it's not mean. That's just how it is. That's how human survival is. So if I am naturally care most about myself, you can say love your fellow almost as much as you love yourself. But how can I be just as happy when you get the plate of food as when I get the plate of food? How can I be just as happy when my, boss is offering one promotion and my coworker gets it, not me? I mean, of course I want the promotion. When there's one lane on the highway and I want to go, I really need to go, and you cut in front of me. Of course I'm annoyed. Like biologically, in a natural world, everyone cares for themselves and everyone looks out for themselves. How is it possible that the Torah tells us love every single person? And that's what, when the Torah says self-love, that's what we're talking about. To love yourself, to really care for yourself. So really have that same kind of love and care for someone else. So that's why all the commentaries have a hard time with this mitzvah. And most of them comment, therefore, that the Torah is not actually referring to love. The Torah is referring to the way we act. And so, as Hillel the elder said, treat everybody as you would like to be treated. Or as we said, act to everybody with love, with graciousness, with kindness. So most of the commentaries kind of deflect from the love part and they say, just treat everybody nicely. And that's what the mitzvah is saying. But of course, Chassidus says, no, love is love. If the Torah says love another like yourself, there's got to be real love. And that's what this chapter in Tanya seeks to explain. How is it possible to really love another person the way we love ourselves? So, just to kind of give you a quick overview, coming from the discussion where we said we are spiritual beings having a physical experience, with that mindset, it's also possible to love others. Because if I am living on a spiritual consciousness level, where spirituality is what's most important, where soul is what's most important, and I see through the physicality, that's what's going to allow me to truly love and care for another person as much as I do for myself. Because really what separates us and what divides us is the physicality. On a soul level, we're all the same. And we're talking about Jews. On a soul level, we're all one. We literally have one soul. So you getting the job promotion is just as good as me getting the job promotion on a soul level. But I need to reach a place where I could identify and I can see the world on that level, and then I can truly come to love another as myself. But let's read it inside because the Tanya says it better than I can. I'm going to share my screen for the beginning of this chapter. Just a moment. Here we go. Okay. Paraklamid Bet, the chapter of heart. Okay. And acting on the advice mentioned above, the idea of viewing our body with scorn and contempt to find joy in the joy of the soul alone, right? That's what we said, living like I'm a spiritual being having a physical experience. When I'm fully focused on the soul level and I don't identify with my body, I identify with my soul. This is a direct path, and a direct and easy path towards fulfilling the mitzvah, you shall love your fellow as yourself with regard to every Jew, both great and small in spiritual stature. Since his body is despised and loathsome, literally meaning secondary, I don't see my body as the main thing, he will not love himself on account of his body more than he loves his fellow. As for the soul and spirit, the differences between his own soul and that of his fellow surely will not diminish the love between them. For who can know their greatness and excellence in the source and root, which is the living God? How then can one claim his soul superior to his fellows? So back to what we were saying. If I am in a place where I identify on a soul level, that's how I can really come to love every single person. In a body-centric universe, it's a pretty drastic claim that the Tanya is making, but I think if we think about it, we'll see that it holds true. And we really we could recognize the truth is the Tanya is saying that in a body-centric universe, you cannot have true love. People who are fully focused on their external, on their body, on their all the external traits, on looks, on, personality, on all of these things, if that's my focus, it's impossible to truly love and make room for someone else. Because physical beings are limited, resources are limited, and every other physical being will automatically be my competition. So, dessert is served at the restaurant, and I see that my dessert landed up on someone else's table and someone else is greedily eating my dessert that I paid for. How do I feel? Huh, annoyed. Like, hello, that's my dessert. Now, I might be very kind and gracious and, I'll be very sweet about it, but of course I'm annoyed. You just took something that's mine. What causes humans to make room for others? It's when I feel that there's a greater good that I want. Meaning, for example, many people would prefer ideally to live alone. I want to live alone. I don't want anyone else to eat from my fridge. I don't want anyone to leave the lights on when I turn them off or leave them off when I, turn them on. I don't like when some people leave their socks around my house, or maybe they leave the toilet seat up or whatever else, right? All these things that annoy me about people who might live in my house. However, there is a greater good. I want to have a family. I want to have companionship. I want to have a relationship. So because there is something else that I want, I will be able to make space for another. The same is true if you think about it in many experiences. It could be someone who's living with you, or someone who's working with you, or someone who you are, spending time together, studying together. If I know that doing this with you will yield something greater, so I make that calculation that I'm willing to, pull back on some of my needs in order to make room for another. But that's what Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Father says. It's ahava shetluya badavar. It is love that's dependent on something. Meaning, I want to be friends with this person because I want to be part of a certain society. I want this person, to live in my house because they're fun and I enjoy their company. But the day that they become not fun, I don't want them anymore. The day that this person, if I hang out with someone for their looks or for the way they dress, the day that their looks change, or that they change their way of dress, or they change their way of acting, I may not want them anymore. So this is what the Mishnah calls love that's dependent on something. And the Mishnah then says that's not a lasting love, because as soon as that third party item disappears, then the love is gone. True love is love that's not dependent on anything else, meaning I love you 100% for who you are. But the Torah says, love another person as much as you love yourself. So how can I love you so much that I'll love you exactly as I love myself? That's only if I peel off the external layers. Yes, of course I can love your looks and I can love your personality and I can love everything else, but I also need to really love you for who you are. And if I love you on a soul level, then even if your looks change and your personality changes and everything else changes, the love doesn't change. And that is what this chapter is telling us is the key to be able to love another person like I love myself, to love every fellow as I love myself. Because when I see someone in front of me, regardless of their personality, regardless of what they look like, regardless of, everything else, their background, their intellect level, their socioeconomic level, whatever it is, if I look at them and I don't see any of that, I just see soul. I see soul, you have a soul, and I identify myself as soul, then oh my goodness, soul, we're exactly the same. Suddenly, you're not my competition. You literally are an extension of me. And if now we're making it sound like it's an easy level to get to, we work on this for a lifetime. But that's the key to get to a place where I could truly love another person. And it's interesting because this is really a foundational cornerstone of the Tanya's approach and of the Chabad Hasidic approach in general. You know, if those who are familiar with Chabad houses around the world, right? There's Chabad houses in every corner of the world, working with every kind of person from every kind of background. And you say, how could you keep doing that? How do Chabad houses and shluchim sit and provide for people who are sometimes difficult? Sometimes they're nice and sometimes they're difficult, and sometimes they demand a lot and sometimes they demand a little. And it's a lifetime of giving to all different kinds of people. And the answer lies in this. The answer lies in that it's a mission of Ahavat Yisrael. These are people, Chabad Shluchim were raised and educated on the foundation that our goal in life is Ahavat Yisrael. Love another person just as you love yourself. And the way to do that is not to see exterior. So the aim of every Chabad Shliach and Shlucha, when someone walks into their Chabad house, is not, oh, how's she dressing? Oh, where do you think she's from? What's her background? What's her personality? The aim is, oh, it's another Jewish person. Great. There's another one here. They're part of the family. Welcome to the tribe, right? And I'm not going to say that anyone does it perfectly, and we all are. It's something that we're always working on, but it's a very unique way of looking at the world and looking at other people. And it's, according to the Tanya, it's the only way to achieve true love of another person. Yes, Sarah.
So what does Hasidus say about the potential soul of a person who is going to become a convert, meaning they were not born Jewish and they are on their journey to become a convert into Judaism? And does that sort of fit into the term re'acha of your fellow, because they're kind of sort of not really a fellow yet, but they're going to become one down the road?
That's a great question. Well, I would say what would the Tanya's approach be? Like, does this love apply to every single human on the planet, or is there a uniquely Jewish love? And I would say that two things. Firstly, we're commanded to see every person as they are created b'tselem Elokim. Every person who walks the planet is a human being created in the image of God that's deserving of respect and kindness. That's number one. The commandment to love as much as we love ourselves, that's a commandment to your fellow Jew. That a Jewish person, it's not enough just to be kind to them and respectful to them. You actually need to love them, because on a soul level, you're the same soul. A Jewish soul is exactly the same soul. We all have, if once we strip away our exteriors, we're literally all exactly identical. So somebody who's on their journey, are we commanded to love them beyond the respect and kindness? That's a good question. I mean, I would want to say that the commandment to love doesn't exist yet until they've, officially converted and joined the tribe. And at that point, you actually have a double commandment to love them, because we have a
Welcome and
commandment
love.
to love every Jew, and then there's a commandment to love the convert. So
Mhm.
loving a convert, we need to double love them more than everybody else. But that's just my own hunch. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Um, so what does it mean that we're really all on a soul level, we're the same? One example I heard for that is, when you're standing like around the sunset and you're standing at the beach and you look at the water and you see all these like glimmers of light on the water. It's like beautiful. You see like or you're looking at a prism and you see like all of these reflections of the light. And then you turn back to look at the source, whether you're at the beach and you look up at the sun and you see where all these glimmers coming from, or you're standing in front of this, prism and you turn around to see where's the light. You realize, oh, it's one ray of light that's, reflecting on all of these. I could see that as a, an example of how we could see that our souls are all one. Because at the root, we're all one. If our soul is a piece of God, there's only one God. And so all of our souls are part of the same God. Now, that godly soul is reflected separately in every body. So each of us are like a separate reflection. And yes, our bodies separate us and differentiate us, and we have our own, unique life and unique personality. But if I strip everything else away and I just see that light, on that level, we're all the same. We're all part of one. And in that case, there's nothing that separates us. One, I don't know if everyone will relate to this example, but one example that I think is close to this is, I gave that example of, I'm sitting and I'm waiting for my dessert and I see that someone else is happily enjoying my dessert and I feel annoyed, right? Maybe I'm a shallow person and that dessert looked really good and I'm just really annoyed that someone else is eating it. What if I really wanted that dessert? It looked really good and my dessert's not there, and I'm looking around trying to figure out why wasn't I served dessert. And then I see one of my kids sitting and eating the dessert, or grandkids, and really enjoying themselves. What do I feel in that moment? I'm just so happy. It's like, I'm so happy she's enjoying it. And it's something it's hard to explain, but she's eating it and enjoying it. It's as if I was eating it and enjoying it. Like my child is basically an extension of me. Like I am just, you don't see in a healthy and functional situation, you don't see parents who are jealous of their kids or grandparents who are jealous of their kids. We're so happy when our kids succeed. It's like parents pray that their kids will do better than them, right? If your child does way better than you ever did in your entire life, you never for a second feel jealousy because our kids are an extension of us. Now imagine now this is because they're an extension of us. Imagine we felt and we saw that extension of me in every single other Jewish person. Because on a soul level, we're all extensions of each other. So when that person, got the new car, got the promotion, went on vacation, found their basher to whatever it is that they have and I don't have, naturally I'd feel happy for them, only happy for them, because I'm living on that soul level. But so long as I am stuck in the body-centric universe, then everything that someone else has is competition to me. Arlene, you wanted to say something before.
Actually, you addressed it. I just wanted to say how, a soul is a soul, but we're all different. And when you love somebody just based on their soul, there are a whole lot of differences between us. But with your example of the light being split into the different colors or whatever, that kind of, yeah. But it's just, I don't know. It's hard to imagine, you cannot be jealous of something that somebody else has, but if you're both up for the same position or whatever, and the other person gets it and it will somehow impact your life negatively, and that's a big ask, I think. That's not to say that you're jealous of what people have, but when there is, you know, would have been really good for me and my family and my circumstance, it's hard to
100%.
imagine that you wouldn't be disappointed. Perhaps not envious, perhaps not resentful, but disappointed.
So I think that's why we need to have this as a commandment, because it's not natural to any of us. And the Torah says, no, I give you this commandment because it's something that God believes we're capable of doing this. It might take a lifetime of work, but we're definitely capable of doing this. Harriet, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, and it's kind of dovetailing off of Arlene, and that is the concept of bitachon. I mean,
The
if
concept of
of trusting God, that
bitachon. Oh, yes.
that what if is it all about love, or is part of it trusting Hashem, that Hashem provides, or is that a different
I mean,
chapter?
I was thinking the same thing. They're definitely extensions of each other, meaning, if I want to be able, if I'm existing on the soul level, then I realize that apparently, if we're talking about this job promotion, clearly, not only am I happy that you got the promotion, but clearly that's not part of my soul's journey to have that job promotion. So my soul is on its own path, and your soul is on its own path, and it takes a tremendous amount of bitachon, of trust. But yeah, having that kind of trust can help me say, like, wait, God's in charge. He's running the show, and obviously it was never meant for me. It was meant for you all along, that promotion. Now, the next section of this chapter actually maybe highlights some of this, because the next thing the Tanya says is, wait a second. You know the story of Hillel the elder? We're all familiar with the story. A non-Jewish man once showed up to the house of Shammai, who was Hillel's contemporary. He showed up to the house of Shammai and he said, Rabbi, I'm interested in converting, but I first want to know what your Torah says, and please do it really quick while I stand here on one foot. What's Judaism about? And Shammai very nicely kicked him out and said, be ashamed of yourself. You're trying to make a fool out of Judaism and, turn this into a game. You're obviously not sincere. And he sent him out. So the guy went across the street or across town to the house of study of Hillel. And he came to Hillel and he said the same thing. He said, I'm interested in Judaism, but I first need to know while I stand on one foot, tell me what it's all about. And what did Hillel say? He said the famous words. That which is, well, the literal words he said in Aramaic is, whatever is hated upon you, you shall not do to others. Or as we often say it, treat others the way you yourself would want to be treated. And then Hillel said, the rest is all commentary. So, in other words, Hillel is saying, not as Rabbi Akiva said, love your fellow. This is a very important principle in Torah. Hillel said differently. He said, this is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. And it's something that we grapple with. We're trying to understand. How can you tell me the whole Torah? Maybe 50% of Torah. We say that the mitzvahs are divided into two categories. There's between man and between man and God. So mitzvahs between man and man, okay, you can tell me that love of your fellow and treating your fellow nicely incorporates, not to cheat and not to steal and not to, and to love your fellow and to be kind to them, and charity and all of the man-to-man mitzvahs are included. But what about man and God mitzvahs, like keeping kosher? How is that included in, do not, do unto others what you don't want done to you? What about a mezuzah? What about prayer, Shabbat? I mean, you name it. All of these mitzvahs that are between me and God, they don't seem to be included in interpersonal relationships. Yet Hillel seems to say that the whole Torah is about interpersonal relationships. So the Tanya says that based on our current understanding of the mitzvah, now we can truly understand what Hillel meant. Because what did Hillel say? Hillel was saying, you need to really love another person. Now we understand in this current chapter that to truly love another person, you need to be living on a soul level. You just need to be a soul-centric person. That's the only way to truly love another. So seems that what Hillel was saying, that if you can accomplish the mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself, meaning if you can reach the point where you truly see yourself and others on a soul level, you're going to be doing all the mitzvahs. Because naturally, as soon as you start seeing yourself on a soul level, guess what? You're going to start being attuned to what God wants your soul to do. You can't say, I'm really nice, I'm truly, truly love others, but I hate God. It's just not going to work. Because if you're really going to work on achieving this level of loving another person, you're going to be, by extension, fulfilling the rest of the Torah. Because if we kind of zoom out and say, what's the purpose of the whole Torah? The whole purpose of the Torah is to create a God consciousness in this physical world, right? We've said it many times. The idea is to bring godliness into the world. We're in a physical world. We want to reveal the godliness in this world. Well, as soon as you're able to achieve that true love of another person, that means you're really living as a soul having a physical experience. You're definitely going to be doing all of Torah. And that's why everything else is just an explanation, according to Hillel. Let's see that inside before we stop for questions. Okay, here we go. This explains Hillel the Elder's statement. I'm right here. Let me see if I can highlight it so you can see it. This explains Hillel the Elder's statement concerning the fulfillment of this mitzvah. This is the entire Torah, and the rest is but commentary. For the basis and root purpose of the entire Torah is to elevate and exalt high above the body, to exalt the soul high above the body to God, the source and root of all worlds, and also to draw down the infinite light of the Ein Sof into the community of Israel, as will be explained further, meaning into the fountainheads of the soul of Israel, so that the one God will reside within Israel, but only insofar as they are one and united. So, in other words, the purpose of the whole Torah is to reveal spirituality down here and to draw godliness down into the world, onto our united soul. But this indwelling of the light of the Ein Sof in the community of Israel is impossible if there's disunity between the souls, God forbid. For God doesn't dwell in an imperfect and fragmented place. If we can't truly love one another, then all the other mitzvahs are pretty worthless. Because we can't, if the purpose of the mitzvahs is to bring godliness into the world, and we're messing up the world so badly by not being able to live at peace with others, then we can't even accomplish the purpose of all the other mitzvahs. And on the flip side, if we reach a place where we could truly love another and be united on a soul level, then we're creating an environment that we can draw godliness easily into the world. So do we say in our prayers, bless us, Father, all as one with the light of your countenance, indicating that the light of God's countenance can be revealed only when we're united as one, as explained elsewhere at length. Since every Jew has a divine soul, and since the commandment to love one's fellow is based on the essential unity of the souls, it follows then that this commandment applies to every Jew without exception. Oh, okay. So this is already the next section. So I'm going to take a pause right here. Going back, we so far share two basic ideas. Number one, to truly love a fellow, you need to live on a soul level. You need to see the world through soul glasses. We need to stop seeing, what she looks like, what she acts like, what he says, what she said. We need to literally see through that and remember, this is a soul. This is a soul having a physical experience, clearly a different physical experience than me, but it's still a soul. And when I can relate to a person on the soul level, I can really reach a place where I love them. I sometimes think that when you have the experience sometimes of interacting with someone who's a truly great person, and I mean a Jewishly great person, like someone who's really, really invested in Judaism and in spirituality, when you meet with them, you sense that they're more interested in your spirituality than in what you look like. Like, when you're talking to someone of true Jewish greatness, you don't think that they're looking at what you're wearing, at that they're looking straight into your soul. That's what we're striving for. Obviously, none of us are perfect. And like we said, it takes a lifetime, but that's the goal, to really learn to see other people with soul glasses. And I could tell you that practice helps. I could say for myself, I'm definitely not where I would like to be. when it comes to this, but I do know that over time of being raised with this mindset and studying this chapter many, many times, I see people differently. And the more I study it, the more differently I see them. And it really helps, and every time I study it again, it really helps in my interactions with other people to see them more and more on a soul level and less for, how they present externally. What does it mean that we're all one? Yeah, we're all from one God. We all are one people. We belong to one nation. Um, you know, it's it's maybe hard to recognize how revolutionary this approach in Judaism is, but I can tell you that in the 1950s and in the 1960s, when the Lubavitch Rebbe was sending his shluchim, his emissaries, to go out to different parts of the world and meet Jews and get them involved in Jewish life and get them to do mitzvahs and, get them to be part of things, he was mocked tremendously by the observant Jewish world. People who prided themselves in keeping Torah and mitzvahs thought it was the worst thing in the world. Look what in the old country, back in Europe, if someone decided to leave the shtetl, we didn't run after them. You let them go. Obviously, it wasn't necessarily a very common thing, but well, why are you going? Why are you finding people who obviously don't care about Judaism, and maybe they didn't pray this morning, and they probably didn't even wash their hands. They didn't do all of these other things, and now you're just trying to do mitzvahs with them. What is this about? And the Rebbe's outlook, which now obviously I feel like now the world's caught on and everyone's like, oh yeah, of course. Like so many sections of the Jewish community are trying to do outreach and find Jews and connect Jews. The Rebbe's outlook was, what do you mean? If they're part of us. They're as Jewish as I am. They're as Jewish as Abraham. They're as Jewish as Sarah. We're all one on the soul level. So we can't start differentiating this Jew, that Jew. On a soul level, we're all one. We all deserve the same. We're all in the same place, and we're all one family. It reminds me of a story. If okay, maybe some of you might appreciate the story more than others, but regardless, it's a good story. A story is told, I believe it was probably in the 70s, or the 80s maybe. There was a van of Chabad yeshiva students who were traveling, I think they were traveling up to the Catskills in New York, and it must have been in the summer. And they stopped at a gas station, and of course, at the gas station, they met a guy who turned out to be Jewish. So as they were taught, you give every Jew an opportunity to do a mitzvah, and the next thing you know, they were wrapping tefillin on him. While they are chatting with this guy and wrapping tefillin on him, another van of yeshiva students stops at the gas station. This van was from a group of Hasidic yeshiva students of a different Hasidic group that was appalled at what the Chabad students were doing. And they started saying in Yiddish, what are you doing? He's not even Jewish. Why do you wrap tefillin on someone who isn't Jewish? I mean, clearly you see how he lives and you see how he dresses. Like, this is terrible. You guys are doing a terrible thing. You're not supposed to wrap tefillin on a non-Jew. Obviously, they knew the guy was Jewish, but the way they were raised, if someone's not acting the way Jews act and, dressing the way Jews dress, then we dismiss them as a non-Jew. So one very smart young man from the Chabad group calls back out to them and he says, you're right, but there's something you don't know. This guy, he is, and I'll say it in Yiddish for anyone who understands Yiddish, he is an einikel of Gor HaGroise Rebbe. He is a grandson of a very, very great rabbi. And the guys, like, their eyes opened wide and they're like, really? He's like, yeah, you have no idea who he is. You don't even know who this guy is. He's a grandson of a really, really important rabbi. So, of course, when the guys got off, the other students came over and they're like, tell us, which rabbi is he a great grandson of? And he says, you know which rabbi? Abraham. Abraham was a very, very great Jewish rabbi, and every single Jew is a grandchild of Abraham. So I think the message came across pretty strongly. But the idea is seeing every Jew as who they really are, a grandchild of Abraham and Sarah, a member of the Jewish community with a godly soul that's there, no matter how covered up it might be. And sometimes it's hard to see. Sometimes someone seems to be acting very non-Jewish and very anti-Jewish. And you say, I can't believe they still have a Jewish soul. Yes, they have a soul. It might be buried pretty deep down, but it's definitely there. And our job is to love them. And the way we love them is by learning to first identify ourselves on a soul level, then we can look at them on a soul level, and then we can truly love them. But there's another part to this chapter, because there are apparently some people who are going to learn this chapter and they're still disturbed because there's still those Jews I need to hate. How can you tell me that I need to love that Jew? And how can you tell me that this applies even to that person? And this person who's studying this chapter is so determined, I guess, to hate another Jew that they will even pull up sources. And they say, look, in the Code of Jewish Law, it says that if somebody does this, that, and the other, then you need to ostracize them. How am I supposed to love them? And in some other place it says, and they're going to pull this up. And so the second half of this chapter is aiming to answer those questions. I'm not going to get into it now because it's not so long, but it'll take us more than the 10 minutes that we have. But I will say another story that comes to mind is, I believe the previous Chabad Rebbe also was once told by, actually wondering if we should try to do this in 10 minutes. No, we could do it next time. It's fine. The previous Chabad Rebbe was once told by someone who said, you know that there is a law in the Code of Jewish Law that if and he pulled out some law about somebody who, leaves the community and is what we call an apikoros and denies God's existence and, goes against God, you're supposed to distance them. You're not supposed to reach out to them with love. And chapter 32 gives a very good answer to this. But somebody approached the Chabad Rebbe and asked him about this, and he gave them a very different answer. He said, of course I know about that law. But the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, has 4 books. And do you know which book that law appears in? In the 4th book. And you know where in the 4th book it appears? It appears at the end of the 4th book. So he says, first, you need to work on getting the first 3 3/4 book down pat. Make sure you're doing all of Judaism according to the law. Then when you get to the end of that book, then you could deal with that law. He's like, we read from right to left. Right now, I'm still working on the rest of the Code of Jewish Law. But the Tanya does go on to answer exactly how we can explain, according to this perspective, what about someone who, seems to go against God and, really seems to be doing everything wrong and doesn't seem to deserve our love, how we're supposed to still love them. The short answer is we're still supposed to love them. The Tanya is going to explain to us exactly why and how. Thoughts, questions? Yes, Arlene.
Long time ago, I studied in a class, Ethics of Our Fathers, and I'm remembering that one of the things that you were cautioned about was the company that you keep. And I don't think that this referenced Gentile company. I mean, the people that you associate with will impact you and your behavior, which leads me to remember that perhaps you distance yourself from them. So where is the love?
That's a very good question. I'll give you one answer. I believe this is from the Lubavitch Rebbe himself. Someone once told him the same question. If you're supposed to distance yourself from bad influences, you're sending your shluchim, you're sending your emissaries to every corner of the world. They're living among lots of different people with lots of different influences. Aren't you worried that your students are going to get influenced negatively? And the Rebbe told him something interesting from the laws of kashrut. In the laws of kosher, we know that blood is not kosher. The process of making meat kosher after the slaughter of the meat is that the meat has to be soaked in water. We have to get the blood out. And another part of the process is salting, because salt draws the blood out. So you take the meat and you cover it in salt, and it sits there for whatever amount of hours. If you think about it, the meat is sitting in the salt. What happens after a while? The blood is coming out. After a short while, it's starting to sit in a pool of blood, right? So you might say, how's this meat kosher? How could meat be kosher if it sat in a pool of blood the entire time that it was being salted? But in the laws of kosher, we don't say it's not kosher. You know why? Because we say it didn't sit in blood to absorb blood. It sat in blood during the salting process. In the process of pulling out the blood, it had to come into contact with blood. But we don't worry about the blood being reabsorbed in the meat during that time, because if the meat is in the process of extracting the blood, it's not going to absorb it. And the Rebbe said similarly, when I send my emissaries out, they're in the process of teaching Judaism and influencing others. When you're influencing others, you don't have to worry about being influenced by them. If you're just sitting back and not doing anything, yeah, you might get influenced by everyone around you. But if all of your interactions with the negative, things around you are from the perspective of an influencer, then you don't have to worry. And the truth is that you see that with, I could say with my own kids, right? My kids are exposed to a lot of things that many of my friends and colleagues who live in Brooklyn would never expose their kids to, right? They sit around the table and on the couch late at night with college students, and there's a lot of different topics of conversation that come up, and they hear people asking questions, and my husband and I discussing it with them. You might say, aren't you worried? Like your kids they're absorbing so much? And the answer is they're not absorbing. They're exposed, but they also at the same time are in a very strong position of influence. They're not being exposed to these things in a way of, oh, let me see, what are college students up to? I want to be, it's interesting how sometimes after certain conversations with students, I'll hear my kids say, can you imagine these confused college students of today? Did you even hear what they were talking about? This is like my 10-year-old and my 8-year-old. When you're in a place of influencing others, you don't have to worry about the influence seeping in. So I think that answers your question, that if you're not in position, if you're not there to influence, then yeah, don't hang out in places where you might absorb negative energy. But if you're
Yeah,
going to, yeah, go ahead.
but just by virtue of that lesson being taught in Ethics of Our Fathers, kind of, in my mind, is a little contradictory to love everybody if they have, I mean, everybody has the Jewish soul, love everybody, but yet distance yourself, because most of us are not in the position that a Chabad student would be in, or whatever, that we would be influencing. We're living our lives.
Right, right. So I hear what you're saying, but I think that the Mishnah still stands in terms of a person needs to ensure that their influences are good. A person needs to be real with themselves and look around them and say, this friend that I'm hanging out with, this neighbor, this, colleague, if I feel that they're influencing me negatively and I'm doing things not in the best way because of them, I'm still obligated to love them. No one said be mean to them, but maybe I need to put down certain boundaries to ensure that I can love them in a way that's not negatively influencing me.
Right.
I don't think it has to be a contradiction. And I think that it's still important to have that there, because we need to know to put up boundaries. I mean, Jews were, as much as, even within the circles of Chabad rabbis and Chabad houses, we're very, very aware of the influences around us, and we take all the precautions we can to ensure that our homes and our children's environments are as holy and pure as possible. Anything that they're being exposed to is only within the realm of influencing others. But, so for example, I'm trying to think of like an example. I wouldn't have my 12-year-old hang around with certain other 12-year-olds, who live around, who come to our house just to hang out. Because I mean, some yes and some not, but some of these kids, I know what they're busy with, I know what they're talking about, and I wouldn't feel comfortable with my 12-year-old just hanging out with them, just for fun for an unsupervised afternoon. But if my 12-year-old is planning a challah baking activity, or if we're doing a Jewish celebration, or we're doing something Jewish and positive, then of course I will have my 12-year-old pick up the phone and call up that girl and invite her and go out of her way to connect with her. So following what the ethics of our father says is a very important piece, saying that knowing that as human beings we will be influenced, we need to make sure to protect our boundaries. That being said, there are other pieces as well. We still need to love other people. We still need to teach. And, if all of us were to not want to teach anyone who possibly could be a negative influence on us, then we wouldn't have any teachers left in the world. Every teacher needs to know that I can teach and I can be wary of what I'm absorbing back. Does that answer your question? On that note, for the next 2 weeks, I want to say unfortunately, but it's not sad, unfortunately, it's just unfortunate.